Have you ever wondered why some people seem perfectly comfortable spending most of their time alone? No large social circle, no constant stream of messages, no endless weekend plans, sometimes no close friends at all, and yet they continue moving through life in ways that seem surprisingly calm, focused, and self-contained. Most people assume something must be wrong. They assume loneliness, social anxiety, awkwardness, rejection, failure. But what if the reality is much more complicated than that? What if having few friends, or even no friends, isn't always the result of being disliked? What if, in some cases, it reflects certain personality traits that naturally make friendships rarer, deeper, or harder to maintain? Because the truth is that some people aren't alone because nobody wants them around. They're alone because their personality causes them to experience relationships differently than most people. And once you understand these traits, you may begin to see certain people, and perhaps even yourself, in a completely different way. The first personality trait is extreme selectiveness. Most people want connection, but not everyone wants the same kind of connection. Some individuals can enjoy casual friendships, surface-level conversations, occasional interactions, large social groups. They find value in variety. But highly selective people operate differently. They aren't looking for quantity. They're looking for depth. And depth is much harder to find. They don't open up easily. They don't trust quickly. They don't form emotional attachments simply because someone is friendly. Instead, they observe. They evaluate. They watch how people behave over time. They pay attention to consistency, character, integrity, authenticity. This process can take months, sometimes years. As a result, many potential friendships never develop. Not because others are bad people, because they don't meet the standards the selective person is unconsciously searching for. From the outside, this can look antisocial, but internally, something different is happening. The person isn't avoiding friendship. They're waiting for a friendship that feels real. And in today's world, where many interactions move quickly and stay superficial, that search can leave someone with very few close relationships. The second personality trait is deep independence. Some people learn early in life how to rely on themselves, sometimes because they had to, sometimes because they preferred it, sometimes because experience taught them that depending on others often leads to disappointment. Over time, they become remarkably self-sufficient. They solve their own problems, make their own decisions, manage their own emotions, entertain themselves, motivate themselves, comfort themselves. At first glance, this seems like a strength, and often it is, but every strength has a shadow. Because the more independent someone becomes, the less they feel they need other people, and friendships often grow through mutual dependence, shared experiences, requests for help, vulnerability, support. When a person rarely needs assistance, rarely asks for advice, and rarely seeks emotional reassurance, opportunities for connection become less frequent. Without realizing it, they may build a life that functions perfectly well without close friendships. Not because they dislike people, because they've become extremely capable of functioning alone. The third personality trait is overthinking. This trait affects more relationships than most people realize. Overthinkers rarely experience social interactions the way others do. A simple conversation becomes analysis. A delayed text message becomes a mystery. A strange facial expression becomes a puzzle. A disagreement becomes an investigation. Their minds constantly search for meaning, intentions, possibilities, hidden messages, consequences. What others quickly forget, they continue examining. Hours later, days later, sometimes weeks later. This creates challenges, because friendship often requires spontaneity, comfort, imperfection, the ability to let small things go. Overthinkers struggle with this. They notice everything, remember everything, question everything. As a result, they may withdraw from relationships that others would consider completely normal. Not because something terrible happened, because their mind transformed a small uncertainty into a much larger emotional experience. Over time, maintaining friendships can feel exhausting. Not because of the people involved, because of the constant mental activity happening behind the scenes. The fourth personality trait is emotional depth. People often romanticize emotional depth. They describe it as wisdom, sensitivity, insight, and sometimes it is. But emotional depth can also create loneliness, because people who think deeply often want conversations that go beyond the ordinary. They want meaning, purpose, truth, growth, self-awareness, human nature, life lessons, inner struggles. They enjoy exploring ideas that many people avoid. Unfortunately, not everyone enjoys these discussions. Many people prefer lighter conversations, everyday topics, simple interactions. Neither approach is wrong. They're simply different. But when someone consistently craves emotional and intellectual depth, they may struggle to find people who enjoy connecting in the same way. As a result, they often feel alone even when surrounded by others. Imagine sitting in a room full of people while feeling completely disconnected from every conversation. That experience is more common than many realize, and over time, some people stop trying, not because they've given up on connection, because they've become tired of connections that never feel meaningful. The fifth personality trait is the one that surprises people the most, because it doesn't look like a weakness. In fact, many people admire it. Yet it quietly contributes to social isolation more than almost any other characteristic. It's a trait that develops slowly, often through experience, disappointment, betrayal, observation, life lessons, and once it becomes deeply rooted, it changes the way a person sees nearly every relationship they encounter. This trait influences who they trust, who they allow into their life, who they keep at a distance. It affects friendships, relationships, workplaces, and even family dynamics. In many cases, the person isn't fully aware it's happening. They simply feel different, more cautious, more reserved, more protective. And because of that, their social circle becomes smaller and smaller over time. Ironically, they may still care deeply about people. They may still value connection. They may still want meaningful friendships. Yet this one trait quietly places invisible barriers between them and almost everyone they meet. The strange thing is that most people misunderstand it completely. They mistake it for arrogance, coldness, detachment, disinterest. But the truth is far more complicated, because beneath this trait lies a story shaped by experience, a story shaped by lessons learned the hard way. And once that story begins influencing someone's behavior, friendship becomes much more difficult than it appears on the surface. The person may smile, be polite, be respectful, even enjoy social interactions, yet something keeps them from fully opening the door. Something keeps them from trusting completely. Something keeps them from letting people get too close. And until that hidden trait is understood, the reason some people have few or no friends remains incomplete. Because the answer has very little to do with popularity, very little to do with likability, and far more to do with how they learn to protect themselves from the world around them. A lesson that quietly shapes countless decisions, countless relationships, and countless moments of connection without anyone noticing, including the person themselves. And once that lesson takes hold, it can transform an outgoing child into a reserved adult, a trusting person into a cautious observer, and a socially connected individual into someone who walks through life largely alone. Not because they hate people, not because people hate them, but because of what they learned when trust was broken, expectations failed, and reality taught them something they could never fully forget. But because of what they learned when trust was broken, expectations failed, and reality taught them something they could never fully forget. The fifth personality trait is cautious trust. And for many people who have very few friends, this single trait explains more than anything else. Trust is one of those things most people rarely think about until it's damaged. When trust comes naturally, relationships seem effortless. You meet someone, you connect, you share experiences, you slowly become part of each other's lives. The process feels normal. almost automatic. But when trust has been broken enough times, something changes. The mind becomes careful, observant, protective. Instead of asking, how quickly can I connect with this person? It begins asking, can this person be trusted? And that question changes everything. People with cautious trust often take much longer to build relationships. They reveal themselves slowly. They test consistency. They pay attention to actions, not promises, not charm, not appearances, actions. Because experience has taught them that words can be misleading, intentions can change, people can disappoint. And once someone learns these lessons deeply enough, trust stops being automatic. It becomes earned. The challenge is that modern friendships often move quickly. People expect openness, immediate connection, rapid familiarity. When someone remains guarded, others sometimes misinterpret it. They assume disinterest, distance, coldness. Yet the reality is often the opposite. The cautious person may care deeply. They simply refuse to invest emotionally until trust feels secure. This can dramatically reduce the number of friendships they form, not because they dislike people, because very few people pass the internal standards required for genuine trust. And here's where things become interesting. Many people with few friends are not actually lonely in the way others imagine. Society often treats friendship numbers as a measure of happiness. The more friends, the better. The larger the social circle, the healthier the person must be. But reality isn't always that simple. Some people feel lonely in crowds. Others feel peaceful in solitude. Some people have dozens of friends yet feel deeply misunderstood. Others have one meaningful connection and feel completely fulfilled. Quantity and quality are not the same thing. And for individuals with these personality traits, quality usually wins, every time. This creates an unusual situation. From the outside, people assume something is missing, but internally, the person may feel relatively content. Not because they don't value relationships, because they've learned to value the right relationships. There's a major difference. One meaningful friendship can provide more emotional nourishment than 50 superficial connections. And people who have experienced both often know this firsthand. Another thing many people fail to understand is that friendship requires emotional energy. Energy to communicate, energy to socialize, energy to maintain contact, energy to navigate misunderstandings, energy to stay involved in another person's life. For highly independent or deeply reflective individuals, this energy becomes precious. They don't want to spend it carelessly. As a result, they become selective about where their attention goes, who receives their time, who receives their emotional investment, who receives access to their inner world. This isn't selfishness, it's prioritization. The same way someone protects financial resources, they protect emotional resources. Because they understand something many people overlook. Not every relationship is beneficial. Not every connection is healthy. Not every friendship deserves unlimited access. Learning this often changes a person's social life dramatically, especially after painful experiences. Many people with few friends didn't start that way. That's an important point. Often they were once more trusting, more open, more social, more available. Then life happened. A betrayal, a disappointment, a manipulation, a broken promise, a friendship that turned toxic, a relationship that revealed hidden motives. These experiences leave impressions, not necessarily trauma, but lessons that influence future decisions. And over time, the person becomes more careful, not because they're bitter, because they've learned. This learning process often gets mistaken for negativity. People assume caution means cynicism, but they're different. Cynicism says nobody can be trusted. Caution says trust should be earned. One closes the door completely. The other simply checks who's entering. And many people with few friends operate from caution rather than cynicism. There is another fascinating trait that often appears alongside the 5 we've discussed. A strong relationship with solitude. This is something many people never fully develop. Being alone and being comfortable alone are completely different experiences. Some people fear silence. They fear empty spaces. They fear being left alone with their thoughts. Others gradually learn to enjoy it. They discover creativity there, clarity there, peace there, growth there, reflection there. For them, solitude becomes restorative rather than frightening. And once someone learns how to enjoy their own company, friendships stop being a necessity for emotional survival. They become a choice. This shift is profound because relationships formed from necessity often look very different from relationships formed from choice. When people fear being alone, they sometimes tolerate unhealthy connections, poor treatment, disrespect, manipulation, neglect, anything to avoid loneliness. But people who are comfortable alone gain something valuable: standards. They can walk away when relationships become unhealthy, not because it doesn't hurt, because they know solitude is preferable to toxic company. This alone can dramatically reduce the number of friendships someone maintains. And strangely enough, it often improves the quality of the ones that remain. There is also a misconception that people without many friends lack social skills. Sometimes that's true, but often it isn't. Many reserved individuals communicate extremely well when they choose to engage. They understand people, read emotions, navigate conversations, build rapport. The difference is not inability, it's selectivity. They can socialize. They simply don't feel compelled to do it constantly. This distinction matters because society often assumes that visible behavior reflects hidden desire. If someone spends a lot of time alone, people assume they wish they were surrounded by others. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it isn't. Many individuals genuinely prefer smaller circles, quieter lives, deeper conversations, fewer distractions. Their preferences simply differ from cultural expectations. And that's okay. Not everyone is meant to live the same way. Not everyone finds fulfillment through the same experiences. Not everyone defines connection in the same way. Perhaps the most important thing to understand is this: having few friends is not automatically a problem. The real question is whether the person feels fulfilled. Some people suffer deeply from isolation. Others thrive in independence. Some desperately want connection and struggle to find it. Others intentionally maintain smaller circles because that's what feels authentic. The number itself tells us very little. What matters is the person's experience, their well-being, their sense of meaning, their emotional health. Unfortunately, society often judges appearances rather than realities. A person with many friends is assumed to be successful socially. A person with few friends is assumed to be struggling. But life rarely fits such simple formulas. Some of the happiest people you'll ever meet have tiny social circles. Some of the loneliest people you'll ever meet are surrounded by others every day. Appearances can be deceiving. And perhaps that's the deeper lesson hidden beneath all 5 personality traits. Extreme selectiveness, deep independence, overthinking, emotional depth, cautious trust. Each trait reduces the number of friendships a person may have, but each trait also serves a purpose. They protect, guide, shape, influence. They are not necessarily flaws. They're adaptations, ways of navigating the world, ways of deciding who deserves access to your time, energy, and heart. Of course, every trait can become extreme. Selectiveness can become isolation. Independence can become emotional distance. Overthinking can become paralysis. Depth can become disconnection. Caution can become fear. Balance always matters. But when these traits are healthy, they create something valuable. Intentional relationships. Relationships built on trust rather than convenience. Depth rather than proximity. Respect rather than obligation. And while such relationships may be fewer in number, they are often richer in meaning. So the next time you meet someone who seems to have very few friends, resist the urge to assume you know their story. You may not be looking at someone rejected by others. You may be looking at someone who chooses carefully. Someone who values depth over popularity. Someone who learned difficult lessons. Someone who protects their peace. Someone who has discovered that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. Because in a world obsessed with numbers, followers, contacts, and social circles, some people quietly pursue something entirely different: authentic connection. And they'd rather have one real friendship than 100 shallow ones. Not because they dislike people, but because they understand the value of genuine trust. And once a person truly understands that value, they stop measuring relationships by quantity. They start measuring them by quality. A lesson that often leaves them with fewer friends than most people, but far more meaningful connections than many ever experience.